The golden glow of chandeliers filled the marble-floored lobby of one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Bellboys in crisp uniforms wheeled luggage carts past guests dressed in designer clothing, while the receptionist typed briskly behind the polished front desk. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered, where every detail screamed luxury, and where humility was often mistaken for insignificance. Into this glittering world walked Manny Pacquiao. But he wasn't dressed like a world champion boxer, a senator, or a global icon. He wore a simple polo shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers. No entourage, no bodyguards, no announcement of who he was. Just a man carrying a modest travel bag, smiling politely as he stepped toward the reception counter. The receptionist barely glanced up, still glued to her computer screen. When she finally did, her eyes flicked up and down, taking in Manny's plain clothes, and a small smirk tugged at her lips. "Yes?" she asked flatly, as though he were inconveniencing her. "I'd like to book a room, please," Manny said, kindly, his voice calm and soft. She raised an eyebrow. "We're fully booked." Manny looked around. The lobby wasn't crowded. Guests were checking out, others arriving, staff moving freely. It didn't look fully booked at all. Still, he nodded politely. "I see. Perhaps you could check again?" The receptionist sighed, typing slowly, deliberately. A couple of her colleagues leaned closer, whispering to one another while casting sideways glances at Manny. A few guests, in line, noticed too. Some chuckled under their breath. To them, he looked like a man completely out of place in this luxury environment. "I told you, sir," the receptionist said sharply after a moment. "We're full. Maybe try another hotel, something more within your range." Her tone was laced with condescension, every word dipped in arrogance. Manny didn't flinch. He simply stood there, silent, his posture calm. For anyone else, being dismissed in such a manner might have sparked anger or humiliation. But he remained composed, quietly observing, his eyes betraying no sign of irritation. Around him, the whispers grew. Some guests looked on with mild amusement, others with curiosity. Who was this man dressed so simply, trying to book a room in a hotel meant for the wealthy? The scene was ordinary enough, just another day in a place where people were judged by their clothes and status. Yet beneath the surface, something powerful was about to unfold, because in less than 10 minutes this very hotel, with all its grandeur and pride, would be shaken to its core. And the same receptionist who had smirked at a nobody would soon realize she had just dismissed one of the most respected men in the world. Have you ever been judged unfairly, just because of how you looked? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just inspire you even more. Manny stood quietly at the reception desk, his hands resting lightly on his travel bag. His patience was calm, but the energy in the lobby was shifting. What had started as a simple request for a room was quickly turning into a spectacle. The receptionist leaned back in her chair, tapping her manicured nails on the counter as if daring him to say something more. Her colleague at the next station, a younger man in a matching blazer, leaned over and whispered just loud enough for Manny to hear. Maybe he thought this was a budget inn, the young man sneered, smirking at his own joke. The receptionist chuckled under her breath, shaking her head. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I already told you we don't have anything for you. Please don't hold up the line." A couple behind Manny exchanged glances. One of them, a businessman in a tailored suit, muttered, "Some people just don't know their place." His wife gave a faint laugh as if in agreement, but Manny didn't react. Instead, he gently stepped aside, allowing the couple behind him to check in. He moved toward a leather chair in the lobby, placing his bag on the floor and sitting with a posture that was neither slouched nor defensive. He simply waited. This puzzled some onlookers. Why hadn't he argued? Why didn't he storm out, in anger? Instead, his silence seemed to unsettle the very people mocking him. The receptionist kept glancing his way, almost irritated that he wasn't leaving. Minutes passed. The flow of guests continued. The bellboys scurried, the front desk, phones rang, and the receptionist busied herself with other customers. But her annoyance with Manny lingered. Finally, after several minutes, she raised her voice just enough to be heard across the lobby. "Sir?" she called out, pretending politeness, but unable to hide her contempt. "As I said, we cannot help you here. You're welcome to wait if you like. But nothing is going to change." This drew more eyes to Manny. Whispers floated through the lobby like a ripple in water. Why doesn't he just leave? Maybe he doesn't have money. He looks so ordinary. And yet, Manny remained as he was, when calm, quiet, watchful. His stillness made him stand out even more. One of the junior staff, a bellboy carrying luggage across the marble floor, slowed down as he passed by Manny. He gave a sympathetic glance, almost apologetic, before continuing on with his duties. But even that small gesture did not go unnoticed by the sharper eyes of the receptionists. The young male receptionist leaned again toward his colleague. "Watch," he whispered with a grin. "Any minute now he'll give up and leave. People like him don't belong here." But Manny didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook from his bag, flipped it open, and began jotting something down. His expression was thoughtful, his demeanor unshaken. For the staff, his composure was irritating. For the guests, it was intriguing. For Manny, it was simply natural. He wasn't here to prove anything, at least not yet. What no one realized was that their behavior was slowly exposing more about themselves than about the man they were mocking. Their arrogance, their prejudice, their lack of respect, all of it was now being silently documented in front of an audience of strangers. The conflict wasn't in shouting, nor in arguments. It was in the tension that grew heavier with each passing moment, as the crowd's curiosity collided with Manny's quiet patience. Something was building, something the receptionist and her colleagues would soon regret. Because what they failed to see was that this ordinary man wasn't ordinary at all, and soon, the truth would crack the walls of their arrogance wide open. The hum of the lobby continued, but the tension hadn't faded. Manny sat patiently in the leather chair, jotting a few notes in his small notebook, his demeanor calm and unbothered. He looked nothing like a man who had just been publicly humiliated. Finally, after several minutes, he stood and walked back to the front desk. The receptionist glanced up, visibly irritated, as though his return was a personal offense. "Yes?" she said sharply, her tone clipped. Manny offered a small smile. "I was wondering," he began gently, "if you could check one more time. Sometimes, a little effort can make a big difference for someone who needs help." The receptionist's eyebrows shot up. "Sir, I've already told you, we're full, there's nothing here for you." Her voice was loud enough now that a few guests turned their heads to watch. Manny didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes soft. "Tell me," he asked kindly, "do you treat all your guests this way, or only those who don't look the part?" Her lips parted in surprise. A blush of annoyance crossed her cheeks. "Excuse me?" "You know," Manny continued in the same calm tone, "not everyone who walks through these doors wears expensive clothes, but every person who walks in deserves respect. Don't you agree?" The words landed like stones dropped in water, sending ripples through the onlookers. Some of the waiting guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. A few even nodded quietly in agreement. The receptionist stiffened. "Sir, I don't need a lecture. This is a 5-star establishment. We can't just treat people like they don't matter," Manny finished softly. The young male receptionist beside her chuckled, trying to lighten the moment. "Look, sir, maybe you should try a hotel that's more suitable. This place is for people with standards." Manny turned toward him, his expression still patient. "Standards?" he repeated. "Are standards only measured by clothing and wallets?" The young man faltered, his smirk fading under Manny's steady gaze. By now, several guests were openly watching. A woman in an elegant red dress whispered to her companion, "He makes a good point." Manny leaned slightly closer to the counter, his voice still soft but carrying weight. "What would you do?" he asked the receptionist, "if someone walked in here who was truly in need?" Someone tired, hungry, maybe not dressed their best. Would you turn them away too? Her face hardened. That's not my problem. My job is to keep the standard of this hotel. People who can't afford it shouldn't even try. Manny paused, letting her words linger in the air. Then he asked another question, one that seemed to pierce through the polished surface of her arrogance. And what if, he said slowly, one day, you were in that position yourself? What if you lost everything and needed someone to treat you with dignity, no matter how you looked? The lobby grew quieter. Even the clicking of luggage wheels seemed to fade. Manny's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, the receptionist looked unsettled. Her eyes darted away, her confidence wavering, but she quickly masked it with another sneer. That will never happen to me, she said dismissively. Manny studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. I see, he murmured. Behind him, the sympathetic bellboy from earlier passed by again, carrying bags. He slowed once more, glancing at Manny with quiet admiration. He had overheard the questions, and they struck a chord. Unlike his superiors, he knew the sting of being judged unfairly. Manny caught his glance and gave him a brief, reassuring smile before turning back to the receptionist. You know, Manny said gently, kindness doesn't cost a cent, but arrogance can cost everything. The receptionist folded her arms, visibly flustered. Are you done, sir? Manny didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there watching, as though giving her one last chance to reflect. Then he stepped back once more, returning to his chair with the same quiet patience. But something had shifted. His questions had unsettled not just the receptionist but the entire lobby. Guests who once giggled now looked thoughtful. Even the junior staff avoided eye contact, embarrassed by the behavior of their seniors. Manny's silence had spoken louder than any outburst could have. And though no one realized it yet, this was only the beginning of a deeper story about to unfold. What would you do if hotel staff treated you this way? Would you walk out, argue, or stay calm like Manny did? Tell us in the comments, because your perspective matters. The silence that lingered after Manny's questions felt heavier than the chandeliers above the lobby. The receptionist shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain her composure, but her confidence had been shaken. Manny's words, "What if it were you?" echoed not only in her mind but in the ears of everyone who overheard. It was then that the young bellboy, the same one who had shown sympathy earlier, quietly approached Manny. His steps were hesitant, his hands clutching the handle of a luggage cart. He leaned closer, his voice low but sincere. "Sir, I'm sorry about how they treated you," he said, his eyes glancing nervously toward the front desk. "Not everyone here is like that." Manny looked at him, his expression warm. "What's your name?" "Daniel," the bellboy replied softly. Manny nodded. "Daniel, tell me something. Do they always treat guests this way?" Daniel hesitated. His eyes flicked again toward the receptionist, then back to Manny. He swallowed hard. "Not always. Only when they think the guest doesn't belong." Manny studied him, sensing the weight behind his words. He leaned back in his chair, his tone inviting. "And you? How long have you worked here?" Daniel shifted on his feet, his voice carrying both pride and weariness. 3 years. I started when I was 19. My mom, she got sick and I had to quit school to help with her medicine. This job was the only thing I could find." Manny's eyes softened. That must be hard, carrying so much responsibility at such a young age. Daniel's throat tightened, but he continued. "It is. Some days I work double shifts. I carry bags heavier than me, run errands, and still get scolded if I'm too slow. The managers say we should always smile no matter what. But sometimes..." His voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes it's hard to smile when you go home and realize you can't even pay the full rent." Manny nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "You're doing your best, Daniel, and that matters." The bellboy blinked, surprised at the compassion in Manny's voice. Few guests had ever asked about his life, let alone listened. Manny leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as though speaking directly to Daniel's heart. "Tell me, do the others know your struggle?" Daniel shook his head. "They don't care. To them, I'm just another worker, invisible. They laugh at me sometimes, say I'll never amount to anything." His eyes darkened as he added, "Even the receptionist, she once said people like me should be grateful just to breathe the same air as the guests." Manny's gaze sharpened briefly, but softened again as he asked, "And how did that make you feel?" Daniel gave a faint, sad smile. "Small, like I don't matter, but I try not to show it. I just keep going, because if I stop, my family has nothing." Manny sat back, his silence filled with empathy. For a moment, the busy lobby seemed to fade into the background. The sparkling marble, the polished brass railings, the chatter of guests. None of it mattered compared to the raw honesty in Daniel's words. "Daniel," Manny said finally, his tone steady, "you are not invisible. Your struggle, your sacrifice, they mean something. More than this hotel's chandeliers, more than their polished walls. Because you carry love for your family. That is worth more than any luxury." Daniel's eyes widened, tears welling but refusing to fall. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him not as a servant, but as a human being with value. Unbeknownst to them, a few guests nearby had overheard the conversation. Whispers stirred again, but this time they weren't mocking. Some looked thoughtful, even guilty. A woman in pearls bit her lip, remembering how curtly she had dismissed a bellboy just the day before. And the receptionist? She pretended to focus on her computer screen, but her hands trembled slightly. Manny's gentle questions, and Daniel's story, had pierced the glossy bubble of arrogance she lived in. The backstory was no longer hidden. It had surfaced, raw and undeniable, leaving the lobby in a state of quiet reflection. But Manny wasn't finished yet. He knew there was more truth to uncover, not just about Daniel, but about the very culture of this hotel. And soon, the world would see it too. The weight of Daniel's words lingered in the air like an unspoken truth the hotel wished to bury. Manny sat quietly, nodding, his eyes never leaving the young bellboy. But Manny wasn't the type to take just one story. He wanted the full picture. And so, after a moment of silence, he asked gently, "Daniel, if I were to ask others here about you, what would they say?" Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "They'd probably call me clumsy or slow. Some staff laugh at me when I trip over the luggage carts. But they don't see I'm always running on 4 hours of sleep." Manny leaned back. "Let's find out." He stood and walked calmly toward a group of staff gathered near the side of the lobby. The receptionist noticed and straightened, her face flushed with annoyance. "Sir," she called out loudly, "I already told you, we're full. There's no point in disturbing the staff." Manny ignored the bite in her words. Instead, he approached a housekeeper who was arranging flowers near the elevator. "Excuse me," Manny said politely. "Do you know Daniel, the bellboy?" The woman froze, surprised by the question. She looked around nervously before replying, in a low tone. "Yes, he's one of the hardest workers here, always covering extra shifts. Sometimes I see him sleeping in the storage room during his breaks because he can't afford to go home between shifts." Manny's expression softened. "And yet," the housekeeper sighed, "and yet, they treat him like dirt. Management says he doesn't fit the image of the hotel. They want staff who look polished, not boys who come from the poor side of town." Nearby, another staff member, an older porter, overheard and joined in. His voice was gruff, but filled with quiet respect. "That kid? He's got more heart than anyone in this building. I've seen him give away half his lunch to a new trainee who didn't have food. But the managers, they don't see that. All they see is a kid in a worn-out uniform who doesn't complain when they dump more work on him." The whispers spread. Guests who had been pretending not to listen leaned closer. Some even set down their drinks, their curiosity sparked. And then a guest, a well-dressed businessman, added his voice. "I've stayed here for years. That boy once carried 6 of my suitcases up 3 flights of stairs when the elevator broke. He refused a tip because he said, "Sir, you've already paid for the service." You won't find honesty like that anywhere. A hush fell over the lobby. The truth was pouring out, one voice after another. Manny finally turned back to the receptionist, his tone calm but firm. "It seems Daniel is more than what you painted him to be." Her jaw clenched. "Sir, please, you're causing a scene. This is highly inappropriate." But Manny didn't flinch. His voice carried enough power to silence the murmurs. "No. What's inappropriate is mocking the very people who keep this place alive. What's inappropriate is judging worth by appearance instead of character." The crowd stirred, nodding. A woman in pearls whispered, "He's right. I never realized." The receptionist looked cornered, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of the collective truth. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes wide. He had never heard anyone speak so openly in his defense. Years of quiet endurance, of swallowing disrespect, suddenly stood in the light for all to see. Manny took a step closer to the desk, his voice steady. "Respect is not a luxury reserved for those who can afford a suite. Respect is the minimum every human being deserves." The lobby was silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum with agreement. For the first time since he walked in, Manny's presence commanded the entire room. And though no one knew it yet, he was about to do something that would change everything, not just for Daniel, but for the entire hotel. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. The lobby stood frozen, every eye fixed on Manny. The whispers had faded into silence, replaced by an expectant tension that clung to the air like static before a storm. Manny turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room, the receptionist stiff with panic, the staff nervously exchanging glances, Daniel standing with his hands clenched, unsure whether to cry or hide. And then Manny spoke. "Do you know who I am?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the hall with unmistakable authority. The receptionist's face paled. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Some guests gasped softly, recognition dawning. A few even whispered, "Pacquiao." "It's Manny Pacquiao." The weight of his name rippled across the lobby like a wave. No longer just a plain man in jeans. He was revealed as one of the most respected athletes and public figures in the world. A man who had risen from poverty to greatness, not through arrogance, but through humility and relentless hard work. The receptionist stumbled for words. I didn't know." Manny raised a hand, silencing her. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't know, and yet you judged. You didn't see a guest. You saw someone you believed was beneath you, and that is unacceptable." Gasps followed. Staff members shifted uneasily. Guests exchanged guilty looks. Then Manny turned to Daniel. His voice softened. "Daniel, you carry more dignity in your worn-out shoes than this entire hotel carries in its marble walls. You've worked through pain, humiliation, and exhaustion, not for yourself but for your family. That deserves respect." Daniel's throat tightened. For a moment he couldn't breathe. No one had ever said words like that to him. Not his managers, not the guests, not even himself. Manny faced the stunned crowd once more. This hotel prides itself on luxury, but true luxury isn't chandeliers and silk drapes. True luxury is treating every human being with kindness. Without it, all of this, he gestured at the gleaming lobby, is nothing more than empty decoration. The lobby erupted in murmurs of agreement. Guests nodded, some even applauding softly. The porter wiped a tear from his eye. The housekeeper bowed her head in quiet gratitude. But Manny wasn't finished. He reached into his bag, pulled out his phone, and dialed. After a brief exchange, he hung up and announced, "As of this moment, I will personally ensure that Daniel's mother receives the medical care she needs. And Daniel, if you're willing, I'd like to sponsor your education so you can finish what you started." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. His hand flew to his mouth, his eyes flooding with tears. The boy who once felt invisible now stood in the center of admiration. The receptionist sank into her chair, humiliated. The arrogance that had once fueled her confidence was now stripped bare before the crowd. Manny placed a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Your story is not over. Today is just the beginning." Applause filled the lobby, louder this time, genuine and heartfelt. Guests clapped not for the boxing legend, but for the man who had used his voice to lift another. In that moment, the transformation was complete. The boy who had been mocked was now celebrated, and the hotel that had judged based on appearances was forced to confront its own flaws. Manny had not just exposed the truth. He had changed the story forever. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind an atmosphere heavy with reflection. The marble lobby, once a place of arrogance and whispers, now felt like a stage where truth had spoken louder than power. Daniel stood trembling, his eyes still wet. He turned to Manny, trying to find words, but all he could manage was a shaky, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for seeing me." Manny smiled, placing both hands gently on the young man's shoulders. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. It was your honesty, your hard work, and your kindness that made this moment possible. I just gave voice to what was already true." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. Guests who earlier had laughed or dismissed Daniel now looked at him with admiration, and perhaps a little shame for their earlier assumptions. Even the businessman who had sneered earlier approached Daniel and extended his hand. "Son," he said, voice softer now, "I misjudged you. I see that clearly." Daniel shook the hand hesitantly, stunned at the sudden reversal of respect. The receptionist, meanwhile, sat frozen behind the counter, her arrogance reduced to silence. Manny turned his gaze toward her one final time. "This isn't about me. It's about how we treat others when no one is watching. Titles, uniforms, or bank accounts don't define a person's worth. Respect is the one currency every human being deserves." Her eyes dropped to the desk, shame replacing the smugness she had worn so proudly earlier. For perhaps the first time, she had nothing to say. The applause started again, this time not for Manny alone, but for the message itself, a collective acknowledgement that something within the room had shifted. Manny leaned toward Daniel and whispered, "This is your moment. Stand tall. From now on, people will see you differently. But never forget, true strength comes from humility." Daniel nodded, tears streaking down his cheeks, but his chin lifted with a new kind of pride. Manny picked up his bag and began walking toward the exit. The crowd parted, giving him a path, their eyes filled with respect. As he reached the doors, he paused, turned slightly, and addressed everyone one last time. "Remember," he said, voice calm but powerful, "the greatest victory isn't in the ring or in business. It's in how we treat those who seem smaller than us, because one day it might be their kindness that saves us." With that, he walked out, leaving behind a lobby forever changed. Daniel stood rooted in place, clutching his worn-out bag of belongings. But now it didn't feel like baggage anymore. It felt like proof of how far he had come, and how much further he could still go. And as the doors closed behind Manny, the entire hotel seemed to breathe differently. Less arrogance, more awareness. Because in just a few minutes, one man had reminded them all of something timeless. That dignity, respect, and kindness are worth more than chandeliers, marble, or gold. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because your story matters too.